Becky. Welcome to Growing Joy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you today. This is a near and dear conversation topic to my heart because this year has been probably the most disorienting year of my gardening journey as I've moved from Zone 5B in New York to as south in Florida as humanly possible. My garden experience has completely changed. And I think, my garden design is going to completely change because of that too. So I'm so excited to nerd out.
I think I would find that really exciting because suddenly there's all these plants that you can actually grow, whereas before they just wouldn't get off the ground, right?
Yeah.
Sounds
It's
fun.
crazy. I'm a beginner again. It's like the stuff that I know how to grow, I can no longer grow, like hydrangea, don't grow where I live. And
Okay.
then the stuff that I couldn't grow, like citrus and mango trees and banana trees, like are on everybody's front yards. It's really wild. Before we dive in, I'd love to know how you became the plant lady you are today.
Okay, so I started off with ecology. I've always had a passion for ecology and for plants in particular, and studied ecology at university, started working in ecology, didn't really get into working as an ecologist, but I always just had this passion for gardening. And so I always tried to garden with ecology in mind and kind of bearing in mind everything that I'd learned in my degree, and then always trying to learn more from my garden as well. Then I think in about 2018, I set up an Instagram account and it's called So Much More. And it kind of just spiraled a little bit. And then in 2020, I had nothing better to do because we
Yeah.
were under lockdown. And I started writing. And now I write for several magazines here in the UK. I write for a online newspaper as well, amongst other things. And I have just written my first gardening book as well called Grow a New Garden.
Congratulations, author to author. There's nothing like your first book. It is just the craziest experience.
It's awesome, yeah. I'm very happy with it. It's kind of like having a child, isn't it? But, without
Yeah.
the sleepless nights. Well, some sleepless nights, perhaps.
Yeah, it does feel like that. Um, your book is all about garden design, and when I was looking at it, I was like, "Oh, this is the perfect conversation because so much of a successful garden comes from the right setup and the right choices that you make before you even start sowing the seeds and sowing the plants." So how many different gardens have you have? You've moved several times, right?
Yeah, actually haven't counted, but it's more than five, maybe six or seven. So yeah, it's been quite a few. Just through a series of unfortunate events, I always have the best intentions of staying in a place and then end up having to move on. Um, but I've been where I am now for nearly 3 years and really enjoying it. It's a tiny garden, so there's not a lot of scope for doing really exciting things. But I also have an allotment, which is a kind of European thing where we just rent a small piece of land because we don't have very big gardens here. And we rent this small piece of land, usually from the local council, and it's just for growing fruit and veg and for growing flowers as well. So I can kind of get really creative, but in two very different spaces. So the garden, I like to have it nice and pretty and you can show off to guests, and the allotment is just geeky and experimental and fun, and it kind of just, yeah, is a little bit more wild and
Is your
free.
allotment raised beds or in ground?
It's actually in ground, but it's terraced because it's on a hill. So allotments are usually not the best land, and mine is definitely, you couldn't do anything else with this piece of land because it's really steep.
Got it. Got it. So walk me through the evolution of your gardens and all of your different houses. Have you always
Yeah,
grown
so
the same type of stuff? Have you always had the same interest and aesthetic?
there's a few things that have changed over the years. So I've always enjoyed growing my own food because I know that the kind of ecological impact of farming is huge. And as I actually studied agriculture after finishing university as part of my ecological studies. Um, and I was just really shocked by how bad our food system is in terms of the inputs that they use and all the energy that it takes to make our food. And I thought, well, the best use that I can have for my garden, if I want to be sustainable, is to grow some food. So that was the first thing that I've always done in every garden, is to try and grow some food. And then I think things have changed according to what my budget is. So back in the early days of starting gardening, when I was just fresh out of university, or actually I started some gardens whilst at university as well. I was kind of just sowing things from seeds, taking things from cuttings, and just seeing what stuck.
Yeah.
And nowadays, obviously, I have a slightly higher budget, so I'm going for a little bit more of an aesthetic look. And this is the first garden actually that I haven't grown any fruit or veg in. Actually, that's a lie. I do have some cherries and some chilies, but most of my fruit and veg is at my allotment, so in a different site. And there's one plant that goes with me absolutely everywhere, and that's a rambling rector rose. I don't know why.
Like
It's
you
like
dig
this
it up
rose has
and
chosen me.
you've literally moved it from property to property, or you take cuttings of it?
I take cuttings, and I have on occasion not been able to take a cutting. There was one house that I had to move out of really quickly. I didn't get a chance to take a cutting of the rose, unfortunately, so I bought another one. So, but it's kind of like my calling card. If you go to a house that has a rambling rector rose, then there's a small chance that I lived there at some point.
What is it about that plant that attracts you so much?
It's partly it's the name, because the name is just kind of, I don't know, quite funny. I just imagine a clerical person in front of church just rambling on and on and on.
Hmm.
And but partly it's really, really good for wildlife. It grows really fast. The leafcutter bees love it. The pollinators love it. It has little small white open scented flowers. It doesn't flower for very long, but when it does, it really goes for it. And I just really like it. It's
Yeah.
very endearing.
Does that rose have a scent?
It's lightly scented. Yeah, but it's not yeah, I wouldn't say it's particularly well known for its scent.
Okay, that's beautiful. If how do you take a cutting and transplanted it? Are you propagating it in water until it roots out and then putting it in the ground at your next property, or are you just taking a cutting and popping it in the soil?
So I've tried several different ones, and honestly, I couldn't really say which one works best. So I tend to find that taking cuttings in water is almost guaranteed to root, but they kind of the roots that they produce are a little bit weak,
Hmm.
and they don't necessarily enjoy them being put into soil. Whereas if you just stick it into the ground, then they do tend to take a little bit easier. But yeah, it's just about taking the right part of the plant, and making sure that you've got kind of a stem, a proper bit of stem that's going to sprout, really.
Okay, that makes sense. So I really want to get into the nitty gritty, as you've moved multiple times. It sounds like you've had a mixture of garden styles. Do you have a name for your garden aesthetic?
And not really, no. So I think it's less about, for me, it's less about aesthetic and more about how it works as a kind of ecosystem, and what comes into my garden and what visits my garden. So that's what I find really exciting, is just trying to sort of provide a space where everybody's welcome, and basically where I just get to watch bugs. So I like it to look nice, but that it will hinge on what the conditions of the garden are. So I will choose plants based on what kind of soil it's got, what kind of conditions there are in the garden, what's growing in my neighbours' gardens well and stuff. So that can inform me as to what I can grow. And then I will try and grow a big variety of different things so that it attracts lots of insects, it attracts lots of animals, and I can just have fun enjoying flowers and bugs.
What about your take on like native plants? Are you looking specifically for native I know some people say pollinator plants, native plants. There's like kind of a bad rap on both sides. Like people get very opinionated when it comes to this. I know you mentioned diversity, but do you try and find the plants that grow natively, or you're really just trying to create the largest diversity of plants?
So for me, it's about largest diversity. I do let some native plants grow because if they want to grow in my garden, then I'm going to allow them. And certainly on the allotment, I have a patch of native plants, which is just a weed patch. Most people would just call it a weed patch, but
Hmm.
that's what it is. Um, so that's important for wildlife as well. But for me, I'm trying to create as much diversity as possible with using flowers that I like because it's my garden and I want it to look nice. And actually, there have been quite a few studies that have shown that most pollinators are quite generalist and they will, by and large, go for things that have pollen and nectar. So if you have open centered flowers, so basically anything where you can see the pollen part in the middle, they're going to be really attractive to pollinators. And then if you just try and have lots of different shapes of flowers, so trumpet shaped flowers and daisy shaped flowers and everything like that, then you're going to be catering to a massive wide audience of insects, and that's hopefully going to create nice abundance in your garden.
Yeah, you're an ecologist, so I feel like I'd be ridiculous for not asking you about this. Why is diversity so important to you? It sounds like you're almost gardening for the wildlife over flowers. Why is that so important?
Yeah, so to me, that's kind of beautiful. Something that is full of life is really beautiful. I had an experience where I was sitting in my garden a couple of days ago and a little hedgehog walked out of its little box in the corner, which was just amazing. We know that they're there, but we don't get to see them very often because they're nocturnal. Just happen to be sitting in the garden at night time. So that to me is like really beautiful. But also biodiversity in our gardens is all about creating balance and not having gardening as just this war. So there was this bloke in the UK, I think it was last year, who's one of these people who's well known for saying stupid things, but he said
Okay.
that he tried gardening and it was a constant unwinnable war.
Mm,
And that to me is completely contrary to what gardening should be.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's all about creating biodiversity. And the more biodiversity you have, the greater the balance will be in your garden. And you won't be kind of fighting things all the time. You can just let your garden flourish and grow and enjoy being kind of a spectator to that rather than having to micromanage it.
Yeah, and being responsive. Like, I don't know. My listeners are going to be so tired of hearing me say this because this has definitely been a thesis of mine or a motive of mine in the last like 6 months. But I've really just noticed feeling myself gravitate. So I started with houseplants, which is all about control, right? Like you're putting these
Yeah.
plants in pots and you're controlling the soil and the water and everything. And I find myself getting more and more interested in these plants that I don't control and reacting to them instead of having them react to me. I don't know how to explain it as much, but there's just this like awakening I'm going through. And it's interesting too, right? Because then your garden can inform you. You can see I'm experimenting with this little wildflower garden I have in raised bed, and I went and I bought all the native plants and I planted them all together, and I'm seeing like what is thriving in this season, what isn't thriving in this heat, what would I get more of, what would I get less of, and learning in response instead of being like, no, you must thrive in my garden. Like that is war. That's total war. And that's also like how people used to garden in like the 70s and 80s and not really now anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is where the problem arises sometimes when you try and look at designing a garden as kind of the same as designing like a house or a
Yeah.
room. And a garden is a living space and you can't bend it to your will completely. And if you try, you will be fighting a constant unwinnable
You'll
war.
be
That's just the
disappointed.
yeah. And specifically, if you want to try and do it organically and you want to be nice and sustainable and you actually want to enjoy gardening rather than just be exhausted all the time, then you definitely have to think about inviting biodiversity and just kind of gritting your teeth when the first things arrive, because the first things that always arrive in our gardens are the things that eat plants. And so if you have a bare patch of land and suddenly you plant a garden and you grow loads of plants, then all of the things in your area who live in your neighborhood are going to go, hooray, finally we've got some food. And they're all going to come to feast in your garden. And this is what so many people find. They will plant a garden and then everything will get eaten, and that's when the war begins, because they're like, I can't tolerate this. I'm going to start fighting pests. I'm going to start using pesticides. I'm going to do whatever it takes to try and rescue my plants. But actually, if you can get through that stage by kind of growing a few really hard-wearing, vigorous plants that are usually natives are really good at fighting off the pest damage, growing nice, strong, healthy plants, then you can get through that stage. And the next thing that arrives in your garden will be the things that eats those pest animals. And the pests obviously are always the ones that eat our plants. And everything else is really welcome in our gardens all the time. But we can't get those things unless we have the pests.
Yeah, it's a game of patience and letting it go from being a garden to an ecosystem.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I would assume
Exactly.
that takes multiple years, multiple seasons.
It does. And it takes a lot of trial and error as well, because there's always going to be things that you think, I want to grow that, and it just doesn't want to grow.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So let's make a fake person and move this person through their first year gardening in a new area. I've just moved to a new town, new state, new country, new whatever, totally new plot of land. And I know that I want to garden. What do I do? I've just gotten the keys, maybe even earlier, I've just closed on the house. Like where do I begin to think about designing a garden?
Okay, so the first thing that I would do is to test the soil,
Okay.
because understanding a little bit about the soil, how much, what the soil structure is like, can you get a spade into it? Is it going to be really, really hard, or is it really light? Can you dig a spade into it really easily? What's the acidity like? Get to know the soil a little bit, and that will tell you what you can then grow. Because the worst thing is if you decide that you're going to have, like you say, a beautiful hydrangea hedge or something, and you absolutely cannot grow hydrangeas because the soil is completely wrong or the climate's completely wrong. So generally speaking, when you're moving to a new house, you already kind of know what the climate's going to be like, but you don't know what the soil's going to be like. So definitely test the soil. And then, if possible, start to improve the soil as soon as you can. So that involves adding organic matter to the soil. And I think it's probably best to hold off doing that until you know where your garden beds are going to be. So then you're going to want to draw a map of your garden. Now I cheat on this and I just go into Google Maps, draw an outline of where my house is, and that's my garden, and then sort of
Smart.
draw in
Okay.
all the things. Yeah, because I don't have time to measure, and frankly, I've tried it a few times trying to triangulate where my trees are and my shed is, and oh wow, it's really complicated. So yeah,
So you go on Google Maps, zoom into like just your plot of land,
yeah,
basically put a piece of paper up
yeah.
against the
Turn up the
screen,
screen brightness.
turn up the screen. Oh, that's super smart. I love that. Okay.
Yeah. And then you can sort of start to, if you put some measurements in that as well, so you can go outside and actually
Hmm.
measure, so that this the fence on the left is 5 meters long or something like that. Then at least you can kind of get a bit of an idea, and you can add that onto your map. And then just start to play around with ideas. So it's a really good idea to have a copy of that map, but like 15 times or something.
Hmm.
And so either you can have it, a digital version of it, so that you can just keep going over it, or just print it out loads of times, and then you can just keep playing with it. But what you need to do is you need to have a clear idea of how you want to use your garden. So if you want to use your garden for growing vegetables and you're probably never going to have any guests around, then by all means turn the whole garden into a vegetable patch. But if you have 6 kids and you kind of want to grow some vegetables, but you're not sure how much time you're going to be able to put into it, and your husband really likes doing barbecues, you're going to need to think about how you're going to lay out the garden so that everybody in your household is happy, basically.
Yeah, there's a
So,
place to kick a soccer ball or football
exactly.
ball. Yeah, totally. Okay.
Exactly. And then obviously, when you are thinking about these things, you need to think about where the light's coming in so that you can understand where the sun is going to be in your garden. So that if you want to grow things that are going to enjoy sunshine, I'm guessing that this is less of a problem in Florida because it's probably just sunny everywhere. But certainly in the UK, where sunshine is a premium, we would love a bit more sunshine. You have to really think about where that's going to be in your garden so that you know what's going to grow where. So I have some areas of really deep shade in my garden and some areas of really bright sunshine and in within a few meters of each other. So I have to think about what I'm going to plant based on that. But if you can lay out where your beds are going to be, add a load of organic matter, and then start to just break it down. So you're going to go, right, I'm going to do this bit first, and then I'm going to do that bit, and then I'm going to do that bit. And you can just work on it piece by piece as long as you have a decent plan.
Yeah. This is a very interesting thing. I wanted to comment on a couple of things that you've mentioned. I think when you move particularly a large distance, but not even a large distance, that soil test is so important. You can do soil tests in the state. You can contact your local government extension agency for your area and they'll do a soil test for you. Or you can do a very simple soil test with like water, dish soap, and a mason jar. It is wild the difference in soil between my first home and my second home. I mean, and where I live in Florida, my backyard is like all sand. It's 90% sand. It's unbelievable to the point that I'm going to grow in containers because I don't know, I don't even want to deal with amending how much sand that I have. Meanwhile, I had really beautiful loam when I was up there. So I really think figuring that out ahead of time is really helpful. And then I think the sun is so important. And also, like, if you have deciduous trees, I also think you kind of need time. I mean, is there a hack for not living through four seasons first? Sometimes I recommend people just grow in containers for their first year because you don't know where the shade is going to be in the winter versus the summer. Like, have you figured out any hacks for that?
There is a hack. It's the Lego hack. If you have children, you can borrow their Lego set. Lay out your garden according to how it looks. If this is easier if it's like a square or something.
Hmm.
Obviously, if it's a complicated shape, you're starting to get really complicated. But if you have high fences, build high. And if you have trees, just build something that will act as a tree out of Lego, and then get a torch and basically plot the trajectory of your sun. So when you're in
That's
the
so
northern
smart.
hemisphere, yeah, when you're in the northern hemisphere, you have to kind of start at a low angle and then work the
Right. And then
torch
work higher.
up. And
Mhm.
then you'll see, so when you're basically completely on top of the garden, that's what it's going to look like in the summer. And then you just go from one side to the other depending on which side the sun tracks in your garden. So it might be from front to back, it might be left to right, whatever. And then you can just have a little play around and see what it looks like. It's only going to give you a rough idea, but it does give you
Yeah.
an idea.
Yeah. And then you have to take into consideration, do you have trees that drop their leaves that then, allow for a lot more sun in the winter and not in the spring, blah, blah, blah. That's a great trick. I've never heard of that before. Um, I love that. You try and get a sense of like where the sun is, where optimum placement for the beds would be for your family, for your lifestyle, and also for the house. And then what?
And then I think if you can, put in your larger structures first. Things like if you're going to be adding a shed or a greenhouse or a composting area, pond, trees, those things need to kind of go in first, really. And to do that, you do need to have a clear idea of where your sunshine is and how you're going to use the garden, what your
Hmm.
plan looks like. And then once those things are in place, it's going to then affect where the shade is and where the light is all over again. And you can then start to plan out your beds. But I think really when it comes to planting up your beds and things like that, you need to be mindful that you can just change your mind. You can move things. If you're
Hmm.
just planting perennials and small shrubs, or just anything really, annuals, you can move that. Trees, not so much. They don't like being moved. So if you are concerned about where you're going to put something large, absolutely place it in a pot so that you can get a feel for it. But kind of have a rough idea of where it's going to go so that you can place it and then go, right, you can sit there for 6 months, and if you are happy there, then I'll put you in the ground.
In the
So
meantime, you
yeah.
can be amending your soil.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And what I really like to do is to get my plants kind of up to a certain stage in the greenhouse. And so a greenhouse is quite important, but you can just use like a box, a clear plastic box. As long as it's got a little bit of ventilation, it helps to just get the plants up to a certain stage. And then in pots, you can lay them out and you can keep moving them around like
Mhm.
Tetris blocks until you find which arrangement works for you, basically. And that kind of brings us quite neatly, I think, to some tips on trying to make your beds look good, because this is where a lot of people fall down.
Obviously, everybody listening is from all over the world. We don't have to talk about specific location, but if I'm new to an area, how do you suggest me trying to figure out what plants will grow well in my area?
Yeah, so first of all, you need to do a little bit of research about what plants will grow well in the soil that you have. Then narrow that down to which plants grow well in the climate that you have. And then in the amount of sun that you have. So you can have like a big list and then just create it a short list from that.
Mhm.
And then from that short list, you can be like, like a coach or something, and be like, no, you're cut. I don't like you. I'm not gonna grow you. You don't bring me joy. So I like to do this in a kind of mood board. And actually, honestly, the easiest way to do this is to go onto a plant website, just anywhere that you buy plants, that you're used to buying plants, and filter by conditions. So you can usually on a lot of websites you
Right.
can
Full
filter by
sun,
conditions.
shade, blah, blah, blah. Mhm.
Exactly. And then you can add them into your cart. And if they have a little icon with a picture of that flower, then you can roughly see which plants are going well together, and you can kind of get an idea for it. If you don't like that method, this is just a super simple, easy method. But if you don't like that, you can just also get some images and just see how they work together. And I think it's a really good idea to just visualize how the plants fit together by just seeing some pictures, because actually, when you put, say, 7 or 8 different plants together as images, there's often one or two that will jump out at you like, I don't belong here. And that's a really good way of just figuring out what's going to work well. And then after that, you're going to at least buy 3 of everything. Buy or source. So you can either grow them from seed, you can grow them from cutting, you can swap plant propagations with your neighbors, but essentially you're going to try and get hold of at least 3 of everything, because that's how you
Yeah,
make
why
it
3?
look. So, because the rule of threes
Okay.
is that basically, if you have repeating patterns in your beds, it's going to look more natural. So, what you can do is you can create plant communities. So this will be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different plants that work well together. And you're going to create a little community, and then you're just going to plant that same community over and over again in your bed. So rather than just having one of something and then putting another one of something and then going to the garden center and being like, oh, I really
Mhm.
like that, I'll get one of those. Just try and have the patterns repeating as much as you can, and then you can kind of use plants almost the same way that you would use paints, and like blend them a little bit. So if you want to move the communities over, you can take a few plants out of that community and mix a few new ones in, and then in the next community you can use those ones that you used in the last community and blend with a few different ones so that you can kind of transition it.
Can you give an example in your garden of specific plants that you do with this so people can have a visual?
Sure, yeah. So I really like Rudbeckia goldstem.
Mhm.
Really lovely yellow daisy flowers, and they pair really well with a pennisetum grass, red grass. I also pair them with, I'm trying to think of the name now. I use some Alchemilla mollis.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just take that as an example because otherwise I'm going to get myself all confused.
Mm-hmm.
But say those three plants will have an Alchemilla mollis at the front, perhaps, and then a Rudbeckia goldstem, and then some Pennisetum. And we'll plant those three together. And then next to those, we'll plant another three of those so that it will be just little clumps of the same thing going along. And then in the next one, if I want to sort of transition into maybe a different color or something else, then I will plant a Alchemilla mollis, a Rudbeckia goldstem, and then a different grass, for example.
So you only
Or
swap
I could
one out of the,
just
okay.
swap out one of them so that it still looks like it's vaguely the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just swap more and more and more as you go through, so that you can have this sort of transition. And it's literally like painting by numbers,
That's
and
so
your
cool.
plants are your paints.
Would you send me some photos of that so we could put it in the blog for this?
I will try, yes.
Okay, that would be great
It's
to have
definitely
visual.
not just those plants, though. There's
Yeah,
a lot more in there.
for sure. So, what are the common, so speaking of this, like what are the common mistakes that you see people make in their first year designing a garden?
So the really common one I think I've already mentioned is that basically you go to a garden centre, you really like a plant,
You
you
get
pick it
one
up,
of
you bring it
everything.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is, it's part of the joy of having a garden and being a gardener is just enjoying specific plants. But think about where it's going to go, whether it's going to fit in, where you're going to grow it, and if you think that it's going to do well in your garden, it's going to match in well with your system, with the colors that you've got and with the plants that you've got, then buy a few of them rather than just buying one of them, because that will just instantly make it look like it actually belongs there. And then the next thing is to think about the seasonality of things. Obviously, you have to make sure that you are thinking about what's going to be flowering when, so that you and just kind of have an idea of when each flower is going to be out. And
Hmm.
don't forget to add your foliage in there as well. So foliage, it just provides the backbone for everything. So you should have as like lots and lots of foliage to provide a really, really strong, solid backbone. And then flowers that are present throughout the seasons, really. So just making sure that you've got something of interest in as many of the seasons as you can manage.
Yeah, I found with this little experimental cut flower garden that I'm doing in this container, I didn't do a good job with that. So right now it's like the hottest. I mean, also it's the worst. It's the hottest season, the hottest month, and most of the plants are pretty crispy. And there's one, more succulent flower type plant that is still going. But I think that's also something that probably comes more and more swiftly. To me, that's the most intimidating thing is understanding when everything blooms at the right time. Also knowing you might take a year to figure that out, and it might be like, oh yeah, okay, I noticed this bloomed this spring. So next year I'm going to make sure that I plant more of it. That definitely feels intimidating as a beginner gardener.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like I said before, it's totally fine to decide that actually this isn't working and to dig things up. Most things, if they're not too big, don't mind being moved around. And similarly, you can add things in as well. So
Mhm.
I had a surprise this year because I had this system that I really liked, this color scheme and everything. I really liked it. It was working really well. And then this year, not one single one of my Rudbeckia goldstones, of which I had about 10 in my garden, not a single one came up and flowered this year. So
What?
I don't know whether they are short-lived perennials.
Hmm.
I haven't been able to find out because generally, if something is a short-lived perennial, the websites and stuff don't shout about that. They'll just sell it as a perennial and hope that you think it's going to last 10 years. But I think that they've actually just been overshadowed by other plants. The plants that have grown around them have
Hmm.
overshadowed them, and that they've just been eaten because there's loads of cover over them, and then there's loads of slugs in there that have just decided that they can have feast without having to risk getting eaten by anything else. So everything's kind of changed, which is fine. It's part of, again, it's part of the joy of it. But if that doesn't work for me next year, I can just chop and change and dig up a few bits and bobs and just kind of have some fun with it. So I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but
Yeah, the
definitely
fun
keep changing it.
the fun with the garden thing, because you're saying it's like a paint by number, it's like a paint by number that gets erased, and like it's a paint by number where you can change where the paint goes over and over and over again,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. Where should I look for inspiration if I know that I want to have a garden, but I don't know where to start, like from an aesthetic standpoint?
Yeah, so I think obviously places like the internet are really, really good, but actually the best place to look for inspiration is in your local area. If you have any local botanical gardens, if you have just
Mm-hmm.
neighbors who are really good at gardening, um, anything local to you, because that inspiration that you take away from there is likely to actually work in your garden.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, if I went over to Florida to get some inspiration for my garden, I would likely come home with loads of inspiration. I'd want to do all of the things, and I wouldn't be able to do any of them because I live in the UK. So, and it's similar, you can look on, certainly online, there's so many beautiful, amazing, inspiring gardens, and you can take elements from those, of course, but you can't expect to be able to apply the same kind of thing into your garden, just copy and paste. Whereas if it's local, you potentially can just copy and paste that.
I am so happy you shared this and didn't just say go to Pinterest, because I think your local gardeners are such an overlooked resource now that we're all on social media and blogs and platforms. I have found the most success in every single garden I've had from talking to my local elders specifically, but like my other local plant people, whether I found them on, nextdoor.com or like Facebook or something like that, or whether they've literally been a neighbor that I've just like walked over and been like, is that a mango tree? How the heck are you growing mango trees right now? And they're so, most of the time, plant people are so willing to talk to you and give you cuttings and say,
Yeah.
oh yeah, let me, and it's so interesting. That's also why, like, joining local garden clubs. Many local botanic gardens have little mini day seminars or courses on like local plants. So many botanical gardens have native plant sections now, when that wasn't very important before. There's so much local education that I think gets, sorry to like get on a soapbox and just start preaching, but there's so much local education and connection between plant people that I feel like is missed. I was just at a networking luncheon for female entrepreneurs earlier today. One of the women in the place knows that I'm a plant lady, and she came up to me. She's a muralist. Like, she's not in the gardening space, and she was like, "You need to come over to my house because my neighbor has a full farmstead, like has a full food forest, and I'm going to get my neighbor to give you a tour, because if you're starting your garden here, your edible garden here, like you could learn so much from her." You're not like what more could I ask for,
Yeah.
in terms of hyper local, hyper specific support. And that those moments happen more often than I think people think, should they be open to it.
That's it. And it is about being open to it. And it's about being, I think, about being kind to other people as well.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you really, for most gardeners, all you need to do is go, "Oh, your garden looks amazing. Can I ask what
Amazing.
that is?" And
hmm
they will, that's it. The
45
floodgates
minutes
will
later,
open.
you're still,
Yeah,
you're going home with a cut bouquet of flowers from the garden.
exactly.
It's the greatest.
Exactly. Yeah, probably a shrub tucked under your arm and definitely some apples in autumn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. What advice would you give as we wrap up to someone who is like key in hand, looking at their lawn, looking at their first home, wanting to do the garden, overwhelmed, scared of failing? What would you say to them?
I would say just brainstorm what you want to get out of the garden. What do you want from it? What would be your ideal situation? Just picture yourself in the garden at several different points during the year. And what are you doing? How are you enjoying that space? And if you've got other members of your family, how are they enjoying the space? And immediately, as soon as you start thinking about how you're going to use the garden, A, it's inspiring, and B, it narrows down your choices somewhat so that it's not quite so daunting. And then hopefully, if your family are also going to get a really nice space out of it, they'll be willing to help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, your book is all about designing gardens. So your book would be a great resource for anybody who is, thinking about this and wanting to get inspo. Tell us more about where,
There it is.
yay, there it is. Tell us
Yeah,
more
so
about where people can find you and find the book.
okay, so yeah, Grow a New Garden. It's got a lot about how to plan a garden, how to design a garden, and also just how to set up a garden, how to improve the soil, how to choose plants, how to create a good looking garden. And there's a lot about ecology in there and overcoming pests and stuff like that. It's available now from Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and all major bookstores.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. This was so fun. And maybe we'll have you back for a pest episode sometime soon.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you.
Growing joy.